Welcome back. Last lesson, risk management inside your own walls. Today we cross the property line because the modern enterprise does not run on its own infrastructure. It runs on a quilt of vendors, processors, SaaS platforms, contractors, and supply chains. Every one of them is a potential blast radius. Objective 5.3, Third-party risk assessment and management. Picture this, mid-tier retailer, holiday season. Point-of-sale terminals start exfiltrating cardholder data. 40 million customers. The forensics team traces the attack back, not to the retailer's firewall, not to a misconfigured store. They trace it back to the HVAC vendor. The vendor had remote access for monitoring the rooftop chillers. The vendor's credentials got phished. The attackers used that vendor's VPN as their entry point and pivoted across the flat retail network until they reached the payment systems. The retailer did not get breached because their security was bad. They got breached because their vendor's security was bad, and they had given the vendor a key. That is the punchline of every supply chain story. Your vendor's failure becomes your breach. Today, we talk about how to keep that from happening to you. Why does third-party risk matter so much? Because organizations no longer operate in isolation. You depend on a cloud provider for compute, a SaaS vendor for CRM, a contractor for help desk, a supply chain partner for hardware. Every one of those relationships is data flowing across an organizational boundary. And here's the rule that nobody likes. You remain responsible. The customer who gets breached because your processor mishandled their data does not care that it was your processor. They sue you. Regulators fine you. The press writes about you. Outsourcing the work does not outsource the accountability. That is why due diligence before signing and ongoing monitoring after signing are both required. And it is not just one famous breach. Look across the last decade and the pattern repeats. The SaaS monitoring company that gets compromised and ships a backdoor in its update package, every customer who installed the update is now compromised. The open source library that gets a malicious commit pushed to it, every application that pulls that library is now vulnerable. The cloud provider whose IAM misconfiguration exposes a multi-tenant storage system. Anyone who has tracked supply chain breaches knows the lesson. The perimeter has not been your firewall in years. The perimeter is your vendor list. Vendor assessment methods, 6 of them. First, penetration testing. You ask the vendor to demonstrate their own security through a recent pen test. Second, the right-to-audit clause, a contract provision giving you the right to walk in and audit. Third, evidence of internal audits, which usually means SOC 2 reports or audit logs. Fourth, independent third-party assessment, like an ISO 27001 certification audit. Fifth, supply chain analysis, which means looking at your vendor's vendors. The nth party problem. Sixth, security questionnaires. 3 names to know. CAIQ, the Consensus Assessment Initiative questionnaire published by the Cloud Security Alliance used for cloud vendors. SIG, the Standardized Information Gathering Questionnaire from the Shared Assessments Program, broad enterprise use. And VSAQ, Google's open source template that everybody adapts. If you have ever spent a Tuesday filling out a 400-question vendor risk form, you have met one of these. Vendor selection process. 5 steps. Due diligence. Research before signing. SOC reports, certifications, financial stability, reputation. Conflict of interest check. Make sure the assessor has no financial relationship with the vendor being assessed. Risk scoring. Assign an inherent risk tier based on data access and service criticality. Contract negotiation. Bake in security requirements. Right to audit and breach notification clauses. Onboarding. Validate the controls before granting access and grant the minimum privilege required. Skip any of these and you are signing a contract on faith. Faith does not pass an audit. The risk scoring step is worth its own paragraph because the exam will ask about it. Vendors are typically scored on 2 dimensions. Inherent risk, how much damage they could do if they failed, based on the data they touch and the service they provide. A vendor that processes cardholder data is inherently higher risk than a vendor that mows the lawn. And residual risk, the risk that remains after the vendor's controls are accounted for. The combination determines the depth of due diligence. A high inherent risk vendor with weak controls gets the full SOC 2, the right to audit, the on-site visit, the executive sign-off. A low-risk vendor might just need a signed questionnaire and a copy of their cyber insurance. Now the agreement types. This is the most heavily tested area in 5.3. The exam will hand you a scenario and ask which agreement applies. You must know all 7 cold. SLA, Service Level Agreement, binding, defines performance standards, uptime, response times, and the remedies when those standards are missed. MOA, Memorandum of Agreement, binding, a formal agreement detailing roles and responsibilities. MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, not binding, expresses intent to work together. No legal enforcement. MSA, Master Service Agreement, binding, the umbrella contract establishing terms across multiple projects. SOW, Statement of Work, sometimes called a work order, binding, the specific deliverables, timeline, and cost for one project. The SOW lives under the MSA. NDA, Non-Disclosure Agreement, binding, confidentiality. BPA, Business Partnership Agreement, binding, defines the partnership terms, profit sharing, liability, IP ownership. The 2 distinctions the exam loves, MOU versus MOA. MOU is non-binding intent. MOA is binding obligation. The trap is the candidate who picks MOU thinking it is the legal document. Wrong. MOA is the legal document. MOU is the letter of intent. The second distinction, MSA versus SOW. MSA is the master framework. SOW is the specific task order under that framework. You sign one MSA with a vendor. You sign multiple SOWs as projects come up. Anyone who has worked with a consulting firm has seen this pattern. The MSA is negotiated once, then every engagement gets its own SOW. The exam will phrase it as, quote, which agreement defines the specific deliverables for a single project, unquote. Answer, SOW. SLA elements you need to recognize. Uptime guarantee, 99.9% equals about 8.7 hours of downtime per year. 99.99 equals about 52 minutes per year. Each 9 you add is roughly 10 times less downtime and roughly 10 times more money. Response time, how fast the vendor must respond to incidents or degradation. Remedies, credits, refunds, penalties when the SLA is breached. The remedy is usually a service credit, not a refund, a fact the procurement team will discover the first time the cloud provider has a bad month. Reporting, how and when the vendor reports performance metrics. Termination clause, your right to exit the contract if the SLA is repeatedly missed. And the NDA is its own conversation. The NDA is the agreement you sign before sharing any sensitive information with a vendor. It binds the vendor to keep your information confidential, defines what counts as confidential, defines the duration, and defines the remedies for breach. The NDA is usually signed first, before the MSA, before any technical conversations, before the vendor sees your network diagram. Anyone who has been in a vendor evaluation cycle knows the order. NDA signed, then technical sharing begins. Skip the NDA and you have just exposed your security architecture to a vendor with no contractual obligation to protect it. Vendor monitoring. Signing the contract is the start, not the end. 6 ongoing activities. Performance monitoring. Track the SLA metrics monthly or quarterly. Security reviews. Annual review of the vendor's SOC 2 reports and vulnerability scan results. Patch status review. Verify the vendor is patching the systems that touch your environment. Access reviews, quarterly review of what the vendor's accounts can actually reach in your environment. Incident notification. Vendors must notify you of breaches involving your data within the contract specified window. Contract renewal review. Reassess the risk and update the requirements at every renewal. Anyone who has done a vendor access review and found accounts belonging to people who left the vendor company 2 years earlier knows why this matters. Stale vendor accounts are a textbook foothold. Rules of engagement. When you commission a security assessment, pen test, red team, vulnerability scan, you write rules of engagement first. In writing, before any traffic touches the target. The rules of engagement specify the in-scope systems, the excluded systems, the allowed techniques, the testing window in hours, the notification requirements, and the legal cover. Skip the rules of engagement, and the pen tester crashes a production database at noon, and you have just experienced a self-inflicted denial of service. The rules of engagement protect both sides, the tester from legal liability, the customer from production impact. Supply chain risk. 4 flavors. Software supply chain. Malicious code inserted into open source libraries or vendor updates. The classic example is a popular package getting a malicious commit pushed to its repo. Mitigation is signed updates and SBOMs, software bills of materials, so you know exactly what is inside what you ship. Hardware supply chain, counterfeit or tampered components. Mitigation is trusted vendor lists and hardware attestation. Cloud dependency. Your vendor relies on another cloud provider, who relies on another, and you inherit all of those risks. Mitigation is reviewing the sub-processor list. Geographic risk. Your vendor operates in or routes data through jurisdictions you do not control. Mitigation is data sovereignty review and contract clauses pinning data location. One detail the exam tests directly. SOC 2 Type 1 versus Type 2. Type 1 is a point-in-time snapshot. The controls were designed appropriately on the day the auditor walked in. Type 2 covers a period of 6 to 12 months. The controls operated effectively across that period. Type 2 is stronger. If you are a security-conscious buyer, you want Type 2. Type 1 tells you the vendor designed controls. Type 2 tells you the vendor actually ran them for half a year. Anyone who has negotiated a vendor risk score with procurement has had the conversation about whether a Type 1 is acceptable for a critical vendor. The answer for production data is almost always no. 2 more vocabulary distinctions. Due diligence versus due care. Due diligence is the research phase. Investigate before you act. Due care is the ongoing reasonable protective action after you act. Due diligence is what you do before signing the vendor contract. Due care is what you do every quarter for the next 5 years. Both matter. Skip due diligence and you sign with the wrong vendor. Skip due care and you let the right vendor go bad on your watch. The court test for negligence is whether you exercise both. Lose either and you lose the lawsuit. One more agreement type the exam may slip in. The BPA versus the MSA. Both are binding. Both are umbrella documents. The BPA defines a partnership, profit sharing, joint liability, intellectual property ownership across the partnership. The MSA defines a service relationship, the master terms under which a vendor provides services to a customer. Different relationships, different agreements. The BPA implies shared ownership of outcomes. The MSA implies a buyer and seller. The exam will phrase it carefully. Quote, the 2 companies form a joint venture and share profits, unquote. BPA. Quote, the vendor will provide services to the customer under terms that govern multiple statements of work, unquote. MSA. On supply chain risk, one more scenario, the SBOM. Software bill of materials, a list of every component in a piece of software, including the open source libraries, the transitive dependencies, the licensed third-party code. When a Log4j style vulnerability is announced, the SBOM tells you instantly whether you are exposed. Without an SBOM, the vulnerability response team spends a week scanning every code base trying to figure out whether the affected library is in scope. With an SBOM, the answer is a query. The US federal government now requires SBOMs from software vendors selling into agencies. The commercial sector is following. The exam expects you to know what an SBOM is and why it matters for supply chain risk. And on NDAs, there are flavors. Mutual NDA, both parties agree to keep each other's confidential information private. Used between business partners, unilateral NDA, one party shares, the other agrees to protect. Used when an employer hires a consultant or shares with a vendor. Term-limited NDA, confidentiality obligation expires after a specified period, often 3 to 5 years after the relationship ends. The exam may not test the flavors, but the procurement team you work with definitely will. Know which one you are signing. One more on right-to-audit. The clause is included in the contract. It is exercised periodically. Typically not every quarter because vendors charge for audit support, but often annually for high-risk vendors. The right to audit gives you legal cover to walk in, request evidence, interview vendor staff, and verify controls are real and not just on paper. Without it, the vendor can refuse access. With it, refusal is breach of contract. Anyone who has tried to get audit access from a vendor without the clause knows the answer is always no. Negotiate it up front. The clause costs nothing during contract negotiation and is irreplaceable when you actually need it. And on incident notification, the contract clause that matters most. The vendor must notify you of a breach involving your data within a defined window. Common windows are 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. Whatever the window, it must be tight enough to let you meet your own regulatory notification obligations. If you have GDPR obligations to notify within 72 hours, your vendor's notification window cannot be longer than your own. Otherwise, the vendor finishes their internal review on day 5 and you are already in violation. Cascading deadlines. Pull the vendor window in until it gives you enough margin to meet your obligation. Quick recap as a checklist. 1. Your vendor security failure becomes your breach. Always. 2. 6 assessment methods. Pen testing, right to audit, internal audit evidence, third-party certification, supply chain analysis, security questionnaires. 3. Questionnaires to know. CAIQ for cloud, SIG for general enterprise, VSAQ for general adoption. 4. Agreement types. SLA is performance. MOA is binding obligation. MOU is non-binding intent. MSA is the master framework. SOW is the specific project. NDA is confidentiality. BPA is the partnership. 5. MOU is not legally binding. MOA is. 6. SOW lives under MSA. 7. SLA uptime guarantees and remedies are the heart of the agreement. 8. Monitor vendors continuously. Performance, security, patches, access. 9. Rules of engagement before any pen test, in writing. Always. 10. SOC 2. Type 2 is stronger than Type 1. 11. Due diligence before, due care after. 12. Supply chain risk has software, hardware, cloud, and geographic dimensions. 13. NDA is signed before sensitive sharing, always before the MSA. That is Objective 5.3. Third-party risk is the part of security where the perimeter is somebody else's network and you have to trust the operator. Trust but verify, then verify again. Next up, Objective 5.4, Compliance. The laws, the regulations, and the fines that put governance into clear as day numbers. See you there.